Howdy, folks, and welcome back to the strange saga of my life. Today we're going to finish up the story of the cults I've been involved with, two of which I started, I freely admit, one of which I became entangled with, to paraphrase Jada Pinkett Smith, and this entanglement ended up with me playing this straight man on stage to a would-be comedian peddling conspiracy theories about the death of Bruce Lee.
Well, that is bullshit, and you know it.
So yes, I came full circle there.
Tonight, I'm gonna prove that Bruce Lee was murdered by agents of the Illuminati.
I was the straight man condemning the paranoid thinkers with my brute facts, trying to bring them back to reality. Not a single joke in sight. Although I did get one joke that got a pretty good laugh, and we'll talk about that. Now, here I am, a would-be comedian, peddling conspiracy theories, not on a stage at the Alamo Drafthouse, but here on this podcast. So, like the immortal classic, The Dark Knight, you either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Well, I became the villain, ladies and gentlemen. Well, now I'm peddling conspiracy theories on the internet. I didn't used to be all bad. I have a villain origin story there. That's kind of what this whole series is about. Because I can say that by the year 2014, I was done with all the cult stuff, and I was pretty much buried in work. Whether it was doing headshots for an actor, or editing some paper that was about to be submitted to a scientific journal, or reviewing journal editors' notes to help the person with their resubmission. And of course, the whole time there, you're making sure that the journal editors didn't find anything that was my fault. That'd be embarrassing. But I settled into my role as a father, as a husband, as a company man, getting the bills paid. I wandered into all my side hustles that were ended either by COVID or by AI. But AI is a whole different saga that we're going to have to tackle in future episodes. I'm thinking now about doing a series called The Singularity, because we're about to go through it. Apparently, much earlier than people thought. Ray Kurzweil, a long time ago, promised us that the singularity wouldn't happen until the 2040s. Or at least the late 2030s. But it looks like by 2030, we're going to be well into the singularity. And what does that mean? Well, we don't really know, because that's part of why it's called the technological singularity. Because we don't know what will happen when AI completely disrupts the economy by freezing the job market and by destroying the consumer-based economy, because only a small group of people will be able to afford anything custom or quality. But we have no idea what the singularity will really entail, how many of the dark fairy tales will come true, and how many of the good fairy tales will come true. We don't know. But before we move on, I'd like to do what I like to do all the time, and what I do best. And that is to wallow in misery and in negative emotions. I like to look at the dark side. The worst case scenario. That's my favorite case. So, what if I didn't choose to be a normal person? What if economic concerns hadn't brought me back into the fold of normal human society? What if I hadn't used my powers for good? What would have become of me? What if Austin naturalism didn't end with a whimper, but rather bloomed into some kind of new hipster religion, with its own TV station, its own national anthem, its own secret prison? But the TV station never talks about that, of course. It's not mentioned in the anthem's lyrics either. Well, thanks to the economy-crushing power of AI, I can help us all imagine such a terrible fate. That's what I do. I help mankind imagine a terrible fate. So let's do that. What if I had succeeded? What if I had started a group, and over time, it just kinda got out of hand? I got older, and I started to believe my own hype. Trapped in an echo chamber built by my yes men and my yes women. What could go wrong? Sounds like a pretty cool place, but let's check it out.
Are you
It's yet another glorious day in Terra Cornucopiae, which, as our dear leader has explained to us,
so many times,
is Latin for the land of the Horn of Plenty. And indeed, this is our land.
Yes, it is.
And he is that horn.
He is indeed.
And now let us pause for a moment to listen to our glorious national anthem.
Yay!
The sun rises red over iron and steel. Vincent the Great will force you all to kneel. His wisdom outshines the stars that shine at night. His mind sharp like diamonds, his will forged in spite. The factory stripped with our sweat and our blood. He is our Yahweh, God of the flood. No mountain too tall, no river too wide. When Vincent commands, we march by his side. Oh, hear the thunder, the people's refrain, echoing glory like sweet summer rain. One voice, one heart, one leader so true. Kneel before a Texan through and through. Glory to Vincent, the sword and the shield. Stronger than empires, he'll never yield. His body is iron, his mind is supreme. We live for his love, we die for his dream. The scholars will worship Vincent's great mind, the sexiest genius in the history of time. Then let us rewrite every page in his name. Our future is his. It's a bright, burning flame. Glory to Vincent, a sword and a shield. Stronger than empires, he will never yield. His body is iron, his mind is supreme. We live for his love and we die for his dream.
And now let us listen to our dear leader as he talks about his childhood.
So the first thing that we should do is introduce some of the major players of the Eagles. The gang that I started in the 3rd grade in 1983 in Anahuac, Texas. I had a few good friends, and one of them was a young man named Ryan. And Ryan was super smart. And it bugged me because he was better than me at math. In fact, later I found out that he went on to become an engineer, and he had scored a perfect score on the math portion of the SAT. And Ryan's father worked for the local CBS affiliate in Beaumont. Basically, he was an early IT guy for a TV station. In 1983, Ryan had something pretty cool and exotic at his house. He had an Atari. And the cool thing about Ryan is that he showed me that he wasn't using his Atari to play video games using the video game console connection. He was typing in programs in BASIC. And so at his house, I learned a little bit of BASIC and learned some cool hands-on computer electronic stuff. My grandfather saw my interest in the area, and because of his experience in the Navy, he knew how important personal computers were going to be. And so for Christmas of 1985, I got my very own Apple IIc, which was way ahead of what Ryan had there in 1983. But of course, I'm sure Ryan got upgraded also. But the cool thing is that we bonded over our love of computer languages. A love of video games was definitely not rare in 1983. But there were very few third graders, at least in Texas public schools, that were trading clever basic programs. And back then, you could find cool code tricks in the back of computer magazines. You would just copy pages of basic code into your computer and then type run, and then the magic was supposed to happen. But of course, you had made 7 or 8 typos, and you had to go back and correct those, so it wasn't super fun. Now, Ryan had some allergy problems, and whenever the cutting crews came in to cut the grass, for the next day or two, Ryan would have to stay indoors because of his hay fever. And I would sneeze also, given a crazy amount of pollen. Sometimes in May, when every square inch of grass is being dominated by buttercups, I would have sneezing fits also. But in general, I was good with cut grass. But I would stay indoors with Ryan. And it wasn't even a selfish act, because other kids, I would hang out with them when they would play indoors, and I didn't mind it too much because they would have really cool action figures. I remember 2 other Eagles members, Jeff and David, both had He-Man figures, which were really cool. I didn't collect the He-Man stuff. I had some Transformers, but mostly G.I. Joe. I was a G.I. Joe guy. I liked my little cards that explained the weapons that each guy carried. But Ryan, during recess in 1983, if I remember, he was trying to get through a science fiction reading list that he had, like many third graders. And I remember him reading the novelization of 2001 that was written by Arthur C. Clarke. But the main thing to remember is that these were not physically weak or small guys. Ryan had more muscle mass than me. We were just sort of the nerds for social and personality reasons, not because we were unable to participate in the physicality of your typical third grade experience. Jeff had become a friend from other projects that I had. For example, I really liked how hard he worked to learn sign language. I was always getting griped at in class for talking, and so at one point I got frustrated and said, look, I talked to the guys and I said, we got to learn sign language. I had it boiled down to about 20 signs, and I had one sheet of paper, and I said, hey, look, take this home, memorize these signs, and we can talk in class all we want. We can't get in trouble because if we're discreet about it and the other kids don't know the signs, then we can say whatever we want, but we can't get in trouble and we won't be passing notes around. Jeff actually learned some of the signs, and I was very pleased with that, and I remembered his initiative. And so I started the group. We had a meeting one recess, and I floated basically 3 ideas. Number 1, a mutual defense organization like NATO, or we could think of it like a gang, if you thought that was cooler. Whichever one you thought was cooler. Then I floated the idea that I was the president, even though there was no president of NATO, and gangs generally didn't have presidents. But I didn't like the generic word leader. It seemed to me that president offered more structure. So I floated the idea of me being the president, and they seemed cool with that. And then I floated the idea of naming the group the Eagles, because I liked eagles, and we could make a lot of cool swag. We could wear stuff that had eagles on them, and that would signify our group, and we could flex that way. So we announced the group. We made sure everybody knew that we were a gang, that nobody could mess with us, and that if you fought with one of us, you had to fight all of us. And we made sure to hang out together on the playground. I started spending recess with my eagle comrades, usually arguing over new rules. I couldn't hang out with Elizabeth anymore, or monitor the bees properly. I had to negotiate agreements and manage disagreements between my eagle comrades. So when it was all said and done, it looks like I gave up a whole bunch of freedom and fun in order to have a recess period that was full of tense conversations. Can I do this? Are we gonna do that? Can so-and-so join the group? What if this happens? What do we do if that person joins? Are we really gonna fight so-and-so? What if they have a gun? Stuff like that. And it turns out that once word got around that I had a mutual defense organization, no more fights came around. No one else wanted to fight me. After a while, it started to occur to me that I had brought peace to the playground. And I hated it. I mean, there were these guys, Rhett and Cameron, and I remember a couple of other guys that would do their bullying thing occasionally, calling us names or coming up with jokes at our expense. But it never got to actual fighting. No one pulled on anyone's backpack or jacket. No one got pushed. And so I started to wonder, how could I tell if the organization was really all that effective? Was this causation or correlation? Did the Eagles really put an end to bullying? Or had just some sort of social enlightenment found its way to the Anahuac playground accidentally? I couldn't really tell. So I had to figure out some way of testing the system. So I came up with the idea of the plans. The plans were a piece of paper with the Eagles' plans written on it. and I made sure everybody knew that the Eagles had some big plans, that we were going to make some changes on the playground, and some of the kids were not going to like it. I made hints at things like some people would not be allowed on some parts of the playscape. And who knows, Vincent might be talking to girls again. He might do some bee monitoring. Who knows? And who knows which girls he might talk to this time, now that he has his mutual defense force. But it was all going to be written down in the Eagles' plans. Now, for some of you much younger listeners, I might need to set the scene a little bit with some additional information about how important documents could be to a third grader in 1983. We had all just survived the tearful crisis of one girl having one of her documents discovered. It was a list of dirty words, and she had a single piece of notebook paper where she had taken the time to write down all of the worst words that she could think of, and a teacher found it and told her parents. And she spent the rest of the afternoon crying in anticipation of her punishment that evening. And so, love notes, papers with ugly things written about teachers or with explicit drawings, those were the kinds of things that made life worth living in the third grade. It was the kind of thing that made a day worth remembering. And so we were going to have our document, and I began to conspicuously carry around the document on me when walking from one class to another or going to recess. I would show people the paper. And eventually, someone took the bait. A young man from one of our newly formed rival groups, the Sharks, had run up to me and snatched the paper out of my hand. And he had the pleasure of exposing me to everyone and showing everyone that the page was basically blank, with a note that said some smart-ass taunting thing like "the joke's on you" or something like that. But basically, everyone knew at that point that Vincent was just blustering, that he was trying to start something, but the Eagles really didn't have any bad plans for the playground. In fact, there was no subsequent show of force or retaliation from the Eagles for me having the document wrestled out of my hands. And I think that everyone was okay with not starting a fight over that document because there was a sense that I had gone a little overboard. The group was serving its purpose. But here I am. I wanted something flashier, more dominant. I wanted more members. But, of course, I started to realize that that would take actual work. And if your group got too big, then you had to worry about fights between members of the group, which kind of defeats the entire purpose. I wanted to keep the group small, just enough to deter attacks. But I started to see that groups like that either continually grow, or maybe if they don't grow in number, they definitely will grow in scope or intensity over time. But groups like that, they seem to either expand or wither. They never just stay where they are. And the Eagles continued. They were never officially disbanded. But they were disbanded by fate because once my grandfather had finished our house outside of Wynn, we moved there. And so starting with 5th grade, I started 5th grade in East Chambers Elementary School, which is the school district for Wynn. And it was socially very different. And I didn't have as many friends as quickly. and so I couldn't rely on starting a gang when I came to Winnie. There were some tough characters on the playground in Winnie, and so I just switched from political techniques to just more brute physical tactics, like carving out a very sharp wooden knife that I carried with me, and also a squirt bottle full of bleach. The first move would be to get some of that in the guy's eyes, and then work him over with the wooden knife if need be. Those were my tactics. And so now I think everybody can see that me getting into martial arts a few years later was probably a good idea, because I was really into weapons, and reading a lot of Batman comics and having a grandfather who was a very handy man and had lots of cool tools and leftover materials in a shed, that caused some problems. I was basically little Bruce Wayne in my Batcave, building my arsenal of improvised weapons. A lot of them I copied from what I had seen in The Road Warrior. A good example would be I had a weapon that I never brought to school. I could never figure out a safe way to handle it, period. I remember in The Road Warrior there was this feral kid who had a boomerang that he would always throw and catch with a chainmail glove. And you find out later he did that because the boomerang is actually razor sharp everywhere. And this one guy tried to grab it in flight and lost his fingers. And I made something that wasn't a boomerang. It was shaped roughly like a boomerang, but it wouldn't come back to me. I didn't want it to come back to me. It was made out of a copper pipe, and I hammered all the edges flat and filed them down so that they were razor sharp. And I could throw one of these things with some force and lodge it deeply in a plywood target. And so when I wasn't practicing my programming, I was practicing with my improvised Batman-style weapons.
Decide.
So what did I learn from all this? Was it worth it? Did I achieve any kind of insight? Or was this just one more collision in the set of random collisions with other beings that I'm calling a life? Well, I think that all this meaning and purpose stuff is important because that's the only way you're going to get morality. You can't have a system of morality if you don't know what people are for. You can't have ideas about what people should do if you don't have a clear picture of what people are. You can't say, hey, here's a good blueprint for a life. Here's something I think people should do. You can't do that if you think everybody is different, and we're sort of here just to collide with one being after another. And then we die, and somehow that means something. I reject that. I think that life is a device. Life is an anti-entropy trick. It's a chemical way of bringing a new kind of order to the universe. I think life has a purpose. I agree with the NHI. I think that deep down, we have an intuition that life is important, that a human being means more in terms of the future and whatever goodness is. We have a feeling that a human being means more than a rock. At least most of us do. And most of us act on that sense. But we're about to fall down a water slide of culture and politics and economics where rocks are going to be running things. Rocks are going to be running banks. And by rock, I mean very, very thin sheets of silicon doped with elements like boron to make logic gates. That's what I'm talking about. These gigantic electrified rocks, these circuits that can crank out ideas or music or math or research or written material at millions of times the rate of a human. And so, as we have to live in a world with these things, these gigantic monsters of competence that aren't even human, we're really going to have to turn back around and ask ourselves, what the heck are we doing here? Why do we exist at all? And I think that the people who wanted to make life about individual fulfillment will eventually be seen as the Judases who stabbed mankind in the back at its greatest peak. The people who robbed humans of what was necessary to continue into the future. And that is purpose. If everybody's different, if people are just supposed to collide in search of their own self-fulfillment, then nobody gets to have a community. There's no family, there's no neighborhood, just a bunch of individuals with knives out, ready to take theirs. And the darkest part of that kind of society is that still, inside each one of those knife-wielding individuals, deep down inside, they're all still yearning for connection, for community, for friendship, for meaning, for purpose. But all they know for sure is that getting more numbers in their bank account is equivalent to self-worth or value. So I think because life is a tool and it is a machine that reproduces itself, that's not enough. It has to have a function, a purpose for what it does when it's not copying itself. Just the copying can't be the purpose. That's kind of silly. I think that question of, what am I doing this for? Am I important? Is this important? Is my life meaningful in any way? How do I connect to other people? How do I feel that connection with history and with society? I think that quest is intrinsically baked into the human mind. I think it's part of our neurology. I think deep down we have an emotional instinct that if something has no purpose, it cannot be important. If something has no function, then it's just part of the world that you just have to step over while you're searching for what does matter. And here's where it finally all comes back to the Australopithecus afarensis that is wandering outside of its rainforest, getting pretty hot. And it's part of a population that will eventually evolve into what we call Homo habilis, a tool-using species. Homo habilis in Latin means handy guy, handy person, capable person. Capable at what? Doing what? Well, the fossils of Homo habilis are associated closely with lots of tool use, lots of stone tool building, lots of flint flakes. And so Homo habilis had a purpose. Homo habilis, when it went out into the world, knew what it was looking for. It was looking for flint so that it could make weapons, so that it could take down larger prey, so that it could conquer the savannah, so that it could be fruitful and multiply. And here's my claim. I think that when an organism lives just hand to mouth, like say a frog, that wanders through its territory, evaluating threats, drinking water, calling out every now and then for a mate. But in general, the way it feeds itself is that whenever it sees prey, it flicks its tongue out and snaps up that fly or whatever else it was that looked yummy. The same thing for eagles or snakes, and even for chimps. They organize hunts, and they do gather materials like leaves, and they do search for fruit, that sort of thing. But I think the flint was different. It was a different kind of step. I think that it caused the development of a lot of things neurologically in Homo habilis that didn't exist before, and its neural architecture that we're still wrestling with. Homo habilis couldn't live like the frog. When Homo habilis saw a large animal it would like to eat, it couldn't just flick its tongue. What do you know? It had to summon other members of its species. It had to develop a team. It had to plan. It had to find flint and manufacture the weapons needed. It had to practice the skills required to take down the large animals. And so notice that now there's this whole economy of meaning. There's a hierarchy in the universe. There are things like flint that matter a lot because they can bring you food, they can feed your children, they can bring you love and companionship. And then there's stuff like plain old sand or a poisonous plant, which serves no purpose. And so now that there are some things in the universe that serve a purpose, and now that we know that serving one's purpose is the key to survival and pleasure and food and reproduction, we now have this idea that things have a purpose, and when they fulfill that purpose, they are good. And when they're not fulfilling their purpose, they're bad. Or worse, if there's something that has no purpose at all, there's just something that accidentally exists, like a lump of sand or an inedible plant that you can't make any material out of, well then, why do you even exist? I think that voice is still with us. And I think in our 21st century world where we have convinced one generation after another that the point of life is happiness or individual fulfillment, we have drained the purpose out of life, which drains the pleasure out of life. So, what is the purpose of life, Vincent? If it's not happiness, if it's not individual fulfillment, then what the heck is it? Well, here's where half of my listeners jump ship. Get ready. I think the purpose of life is obvious. It's reproduction. The purpose of life is to make more life, is to not go extinct. Now, everybody who hears that kind of talk immediately starts to think that I'm talking about some sort of fascist Handmaid's Tale definition of life, where people who don't have children are somehow lesser than. No. In many cases, in my view, many people who have lots of children are undermining the purpose of life. And, in many cases, in my view, people who have no biological offspring have been tremendously successful in furthering the purpose of life. Because the purpose of human life is not just to breed your own genome. That's what bacteria and rats and cancer cells do really, really well. It's kind of beneath us. We are designed to live in a thriving and growing community.
Jody, are you decide? Sign. Ours.
His eyes see the truth through the veil and the haze. We will follow his steps to the end of our
Our great leader was born in 1975, the same year Jaws was released.
Such a great movie.
Classic film.
A popcorn movie. A crowd pleaser.
Just like our dear leader.
Just like our dear leader.
So funny.
He was born in San Diego, but his mother's family was deeply Texan, with roots in Chambers County, going back to the 18th century, and Jean Lafitte.
So impressive.
His grandfather sacrificed his own Texanhood and lived in California because he was a patriot.
So impressive.
Why are we all like chicks?
And now, more little-known facts about our dear leader Vincent. When he was practicing Taekwondo, his signature board break was a jump, spin, hook kick, speed break.
Ooh.
That's the kind where the person holding the wood doesn't support it. They just let it dangle from their fingers. And you have to hit it really fast to make the break.
Wow. Impressive.
He also once said that Titanic would never make a penny. So there's that.
Well, but he also predicted that Christian Bale would be Batman.
That's back when he was an American Psycho. Genius.
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 So funny.
He once told a joke that was so funny, the person literally almost died.
Ooh.
Like he banged his head or something.
So funny.
So funny.
Really? You think he's that funny? What's something he said lately that was funny?
Well, like the way he yells, everything, and stuff like that. And I think the stuff from when he was a kid was funny.
I mean, it's not really funny. It's kind of fucked up, honestly. I mean, he deliberately started a fight just so he could see who was really loyal to him. And all this started from him collecting bees to kill and study like some kind of little freak. That's textbook psychopath. Textbook. And the fact that he can't tell the difference between a cult and a gang. And he thinks everyone is searching for purpose and for God. And so, like, what? He satisfies that? He's a good substitute for God?
That's what he told me.
He said that?
Well, he didn't tell me in so many words. He made me listen to Personal Jesus by Depeche Mode. And then he looked in my eyes and asked me, do you understand?
Well, what did you say? No. Jesus Christ, Amber. The answer is always yes. If he asks you, do you understand? You say yes, unless you want to lose the next hour of your life and 1% of your hearing.
I mean, we have to think about our ancestral environment. We have to think about what environment we are suited for, what we evolved to live like. What kind of lifestyle did we evolve to live? Well, it appears that we're designed to live in a small geographic area that we wander around periodically within. Lots of breathing room. So humans aren't designed to stay in exactly one place all the time. And when they do move, their entire community moves with them. So they are not traveling alone. Humans are not meant to do that. They are with a group that is no larger than a few hundred people. Households of husbands and wives and a few kids and a few grandparents living on territory that is claimed by nomads. And girls were paired up with guys from the area based on family negotiations, and sometimes with input from the kids themselves, but not always. If you were a girl, you were married off at 15 or 16 to some guy who just turned 25 or 30, depending on what the economic situation was like. You aimed to have something like 6 children. 3 of them would survive to adulthood. And you would likely be dead by 40. That is the life that we are biologically designed to live. So I think that when you inject capitalism and this strange sort of self-love that we're supposed to have now into this equation, you end up with something bad, I think. Because I don't think that self-love is possible. I think it's a completely deceptive and self-contradictory concept. I think that anything that is truly love is directed away from the self. When love comes directed back to you, it's just self-preservation. It's just selfishness. It's just prudence. It's just not wanting to get ripped off. It's just wanting to improve yourself. It's just wanting to gather resources. And those things are cool. Those things are okay. I have all those feelings, definitely. Especially anytime I walk out the front door or walk down the street in public or if I'm on the internet. But I don't call it love. It doesn't qualify. If all you have is self-love, you have no love. It's not real. Love has to go from one person to another. And the less they deserve it, the better. Because that means that it's not something you're doing for some sort of reward later on. The more undeserved and awful the person you're loving, the better it is for you because that's more evidence that it's real love. And so remember that the standard is not the biological reproduction of any given individual. I mean, you gotta do better than that. Joseph Stalin reproduced. He was probably one of the worst humans that ever existed in all of human history. And he had plenty of kids. And he lived to a ripe old age. He died on the floor of his office, dreaming of sugar plums and, I guess, the murders that he wasn't strong enough to commit in his old age. But there are many humans who didn't biologically reproduce, but their legacy and their impact on the world is overwhelmingly positive. I think of, in particular, 2 of my models of leadership, 2 people that I look up to when I think about what leaders should be like, and that's Queen Elizabeth I, who had no offspring that we know of, but was enormously successful in terms of what humans should be. Then Alexander the Great, who did not reproduce. And in his case, he should have known better. Just for political expediency, he should have done what he needed to do, but that was one of his big faults. Now, in terms of Queen Elizabeth, why did she not marry and have children? That I don't hold against her. Because she had what some sociologists have called the high heels effect, and what I think we should just go ahead and call the Queen Elizabeth syndrome. And what that means is Queen Elizabeth was at the absolute top of the social hierarchy. And based on the cultural attitudes, and I think to some extent the biological attitudes of the world around her, anyone that she married would have been a threat to her power. They would have attempted to usurp the throne from her and her family. Now, what Elizabeth did was essentially hold the throne for her cousin James. And had she married, the English throne may very well have fallen into Spanish or French hands. And so, in a lot of cases, women at the very top of the social pyramid run into this problem where they can't marry without giving up a lot of their power. And of course, that's because of people's persistent attitudes about what a husband is and what a wife is. I'm going to argue that a lot of that is biological. And so the standard for a good life is not, did you stamp out a bunch of copies of yourself? Because there are plenty of terrible people that did that, and we really, really didn't want more copies of them. But we got them, and we got to deal with them. But what is the real standard then? I think is the community around you healthier because of your life? Were your actions future-oriented and other-oriented? Or were they all just now-oriented? Were they just self-oriented? Were you just being prudent? Were you just making sure to gather resources around yourself? So I think that is the standard. Do your actions pay it forward? Do they plant seeds for a better tomorrow among other people? Or are your actions just a reaction to something awful that happened to you in your past, and you're taking it out on other people? Are you directing support and affection and understanding toward another living thing? Or are you just practicing self-love and self-support? I think that's the standard. Individuals don't matter. A world full of individuals is a terrible world that I don't want to live in. I like networks, families, friendships, organizations, co-ops, institutions, teams. That's where happiness really is. That's where the future really is. People quietly lost in the world of their own screen scroll, their own doom scrolling, is a recipe for extinction, I think. I actually am going to be dramatic about this. And I think that the mistake of the ideal of self-love is a big part of why humans may have fewer than 200 years left. Because our lives are not about us. Humans were not supposed to be alone. We actually need each other.
Decide. Ours. Don't have to.
And, of course, as you have heard, Bruce Lee was one of my idols and influences growing up. It started off with me watching old martial arts movies on UHF channels on Saturday and Sunday afternoons, with the bad overdubbing of old Hong Kong classics. And what I loved about Bruce Lee wasn't that he was the toughest guy in the world who could beat anybody up. That's not the case. Bruce Lee was a rather small man, incredibly fast and pound for pound one of the strongest people in the world, but it wasn't any kind of invincibility. What I loved about Bruce Lee was his capacity for self-mastery. He was a model of self-discipline, self-determination. For me, along with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Bruce Lee was a model of self-discipline, self-determination, ambition, drive, persistence. Another weird thing is that Bruce Lee was a quarter German. Early 20th century Hong Kong was a wild and unpredictable place. You never knew who you were going to meet. I remember buying Bruce Lee's book, The Tao of Jeet Kune Do, from Walden Books when I was in high school. And it was a book that he wrote when he was losing his mind, being bedridden because of a back injury that he had. And so, to keep himself busy, he wrote a book. And so, the Dionysium guys knew about my interest in martial arts. They also knew that I had done debates before, and I didn't have a lot of social anxiety or any anxiety over public speaking. And so, they thought it would be a good idea for me to come in and talk about Bruce Lee's death. And they didn't give me much of a heads up as to who I would be debating. And of course, if you know me, I didn't really care, and I'm like, yeah, okay, bring whoever. I'll take him down. And I was sort of set up as a straight man for a comedy bit. But I did have my own little strike at humor. You can't be completely humorless the entire time, even if you are the designated straight man. And a big part of my argument as to why there was such strangeness in the behavior of the local law enforcement, it was because of cultural ideas about privacy and not letting certain things get into the news media. And as we know, Bruce Lee had many girlfriends in Hong Kong. And the fact that he was found at one of these women's apartments was not something that they wanted to drone on about in the media, thanks to Bruce Lee having a wife back in Seattle. When I was talking about Bruce Lee's girlfriends, I mentioned the idea of how it might be kind of a thing to say that you had sex with Bruce Lee. Because, after all, that's got to be interesting, right? And I mused out loud about how perhaps memorable or athletic or extensive sex with Bruce Lee might be. And I remember saying, surely that's got to be quite a thing to have sex with Bruce Lee. I mean, if you think about it. I mean, I've thought about it. And of course, everybody thought that was funny. To clarify, I have thought about it in an intellectual sense, to get a sense of what he was like as a person. I have never had any sexual interest in Bruce Lee, but you got to get your jokes where you can, especially when you've been set up as the straight man under the crosshairs of some comedian. And so, here I am, no cult to speak of, just this sad little fantasy that I'm using AI to create. But I have no followers anymore. No stated mutual defense organization. Currently, my document that says plans doesn't have much on it, aside from paying more bills and watching after my kids and doing more of this podcast whenever I have time. And so, until next time, I say let's think about, what is your purpose? What is the goal of your life that's not personal fulfillment? How big is the part of your life that isn't about you? Because that's the most important part. We've all been taught since the 60s to focus on the me part of our life. But I think we're all finding out that when we all do that, that makes us miserable and anxious and depressed and alone and eventually extinct. So get out there and love. And I mean real love, which means giving time and effort to people who don't deserve it. You're gonna feel like you're being ripped off, and that's okay. That's called selflessness. That ripped off feeling, that's love. Love is about getting ripped off. So go out there and get on your purpose while you still have time. And until next time, talk to you later.